taking over the world one nerd at a time. Total Nerd Takeover.
Hello, Chris Gray from Total Nerd Takeover Studios, and today I'm going to be talking about my mixer, and it's going to be a little bit of a behind the scenes of how I do some of the audio that I do, and I'll probably be talking a little bit about the video as well. But this is not a tour of the studio that will be coming up. I'll be doing a video of a tour for the studio a little bit later once I do some spring cleaning. But this video is in response to some emails and a couple of questions that I've gotten on my tnrt.tv YouTube channel. And one of the questions is, can I podcast without a mixer? Another question is why I need a mixer, why I would need a mixer for podcasting. So, and a couple of questions about my mixer. So I figured that I would show you guys a little bit of the behind the scenes magic, how I move the audio around, and why I use a mixer. Now, I'm not going to get crazy technical here. That would maybe be another video where I can get into more detail, but just wanted to answer these questions and give you a brief idea of why it is good to have a mixer and maybe what type of mixer to look for. When we first started the studio, I started researching, how I can move the audio around. By having guests on the podcast and being able to record it. Now, I will say that I record using GarageBand. I'm using the older version, the 6.0 version. I'm not really happy with the new version of GarageBand. So, I use it from time to time, and it does have its advantages. But for me and my what I'm doing here, it's still kind of a disadvantage. Some of the things that I'll say when you're podcasting, you don't need to have a mixer. One of the questions was, do I even need a mixer when I'm podcasting, doing a simple podcast? Well, the short answer is no. You can actually, if you're doing a single solo person podcast, you can do it with just a microphone, and you don't have to have a $400 microphone either. You can do, there's a lot of inexpensive microphones. And a microphone that I recommend is the Audio-Technica 2100 USB mic. Now, I don't have one in the studio at the moment. I had sent one out to one of my hosts that needed a microphone, but I'm going to be getting another one, and I could do a comparison review of the difference in sound quality. And if you check another video I've done, I actually have a lapel mic that I have. I think it's the Audio-Technica lapel mic. And you can hear the differences between the Heil PR40 and the lapel mic. That being said, you can actually get a USB microphone and plug it right into the machine you're going to be recording from. Whether you're using a Windows machine or a Mac, you can use Audacity, which I believe works for both Mac and PC. Now, if you're going to use GarageBand or you're looking to use GarageBand, then you're going to want to stick with Mac. Either way, you're fine, and there's other programs as well. But if you're going to be doing a simple podcast, you're not going to really need a super powerful program. Now, I will also say this. There are a lot of benefits to having a mixer. What I tell people generally is, with the mixer, I can transfer and move audio anywhere I want to. So think of it as a box with a bunch of buttons that audio goes into it, and then you can spread the audio in whatever direction you need to. Now, why this is good for it's not even a complicated podcast, but I wouldn't call it simple either. If you're going to have hosts on your podcast, guest hosts, or even guests or co-hosts, whether they're in studio or they're out studio. When I say out studio, a lot of our hosts at our podcast network live all over the country, and some even live overseas. Now, how do I pipe their calls in? I use Skype, which I'm going to show you in just a second how I have it set up. So hopefully this video will help you, and you can decide and figure out what type of mixer you want to get. There's a lot of good brands out there, so you can't really go wrong. I'm using a Behringer at the moment. Looking back, and I'll explain when I start showing you the mixer, I probably would have gotten a little bit nicer mixer, but for just starting out, I think this is an okay mixer. So let's get started. Okay, like I said earlier, I'm not going to go into crazy detail, but I wanted to show you how I do it and what my setup is. And if it sounds like something you're interested in, or it sounds like a solution to your problem, then that's fantastic. So what we're looking at right now is my 17-inch Toshiba laptop. Now, what I use this machine for, I basically just use it for Skype. So the only thing that I do on this laptop is Skype. I know it seems like overkill, but the laptop was donated for the studio, so it works out really good. Now, the reason why I'm using a Windows-based laptop for my Skype, and you can use Mac, it's a little bit of a workaround, but you can use one, at least for my setup anyway. All these setups are going to vary. Your setup may vary from what I have, and I'll do the best I can to kind of explain certain things. So right now we're looking at the Skype machine. Oh, I call it the Skype machine. And this is where I have all my hosts from across the country and overseas. And I call them using a program called Skype. One thing to keep in mind, now this laptop and many laptops today also have built-in microphones and cameras. Do not use that. Matter of fact, you're going to want to go into the settings of Skype and make sure that that you're not using the internal speakers and microphone. So what happens is I make the phone call, and there's two 3.5 millimeter jacks here. One is a microphone in, and one is a headphone jack. And they're both 3.5 millimeter jacks. I have the microphone jack, okay, going in as an input, which will come off of the mixer, and I'll show you in a second. And I have the headphones as an out. So whatever is going on in Skype, when my co-hosts talk in Skype, that audio goes out of the headphone jack and into the mixer. And then when I talk to my hosts or my guests, or I play a sound clip, it goes out of the mixer and goes into the microphone as an input. So that's something to keep in mind. And I'll show you those connections on the mixer. Okay, now here's a good look at the mixer. Now, there is another way to do this. You can actually use software. If you only have one computer and you want to do have a setup similar to this with Skype, you can use software called Virtual Cable. I don't recommend it, but it is something that works. You really have to finagle with it. I never was able to get it to work really good, although I do have friends in the podcasting industry that have gotten the virtual audio cables to work. But I find this to be a lot better, and it gives me a lot more flexibility. So moving right along, we're going to be talking here about the mixer. First thing I want to mention is you can see these green lights going up and down as I speak, and that is telling that is telling you and telling me my decibel range. Now, I usually tell people that you want your decibel range to be around 0 decibels. 0 decibels is a sweet spot. And the long and short of it is, if you're at 0 decibels, you can magnify the audio if it's a little bit quiet in your podcast or in your recording. If you're up to like plus 5 decibels, you're going to run into some issues where you have what they call audio clipping, where you hear this really nasty sound when your audio gets way too high. So you want to leave it around 0 decibels, and that way when your audience, or when you play it back, you can adjust it in your headphones or on your radio, or however the person is consuming your podcast or your audio or video. So give yourself a stick around 0 decibels, and even a little bit under. You can always adjust it in your recording software, and that gives you what they call headroom. Headroom, so that when you do talk really loud, it gives you some decibel space before you get up into the 10s. When you get up to the 10s and 12s, you're going to clip. So you want to stay right in the green, and you'll know when you're getting up too high because you'll see a yellow, and then you'll see a red. I'm not going to demonstrate because I don't want to blow your eardrums out. Okay, so to help answer why you may need a mixer if you're doing a little bit more complicated podcast, all of the audio I do in my shows, and they all get routed through this mixer, and they go somewhere. I can send it all over the place. I could even hook up a digital recorder, and I can record on my. I use a 27-inch iMac to record my podcasts and do all the editing and stuff, and also for the videos. So I can send the audio to that machine, record, and I could also, if I wanted to, send it to an external digital recorder, and I would have two copies. So if something happened on the computer, and for some reason my computer took a poop, then I would still have the recording on an external recorder. Now, I don't do that right now because I don't have the funds to get one, but I will eventually get one going down the road. So I mentioned that the Skype machine is connected to this mixer, and the Skype machine I have currently on this channel right here. This is channel 4. And this is, now I've never been trained to use a mixer, so you have to bear with me. I've just kind of learned this by stumbling around and figuring it out and doing some research online. The microphone you hear me talking on right now, my Heil PR40, is on channel 1, which is right here. Okay? So that's channel 1. Now on channel 7/8, which is a split stereo channel, which is what I think they call it, this is where my 27-inch iMac inputs audio. Now the input, so that's important. On the back of my iMac, there is only a headphone jack, so I could listen to music and whatnot and what have you. There's no microphone in jack because everything's going USB, so the USB would act as the in. So the input into the mixer from my 27-inch iMac is coming in right here on channel 7/8. Because it's a 3.5 millimeter jack, stereo headphone jack, I had split it on these two mono 1/4-inch cables into a right channel and a left channel, and it goes right here into channels. That's why it's called 7/8, because it's a split stereo channel. My headphones, when I'm recording to, and this is another reason I like having a mixer, because I can monitor my audio as I'm recording and also monitor my fellow hosts without just, using a meter. The meters is fine, but a lot of times you need to hear it. So right here is the headphones port, which is a 1/4-inch stereo jack. So that's fantastic. That works out really nice. I can monitor the audio that way. And in some recording software, I know in GarageBand, you can actually monitor your audio without using a mixer. So again, you could podcast without a mixer, but this is going to make it a little bit easier. Also down the road, and I'll explain as we get further on. Now, pay no attention to this area right here. This area here is for sound effects. I don't really use it. There's actually two mixers very similar to this with the same numbering, X1204 Behringer. And this is the FX version. And there's another version like my sister has that she on her podcasting. For her podcast, it's called the Hockey Hour. She doesn't use. She uses a very similar mixer, but it's the sister mixer that doesn't have this, and it's a little bit cheaper, which I recommend if you're not going to be doing music and you don't need weird effects, because a lot of those effects you can also do on your recording post recording. So you have all these different, there's inputs everywhere, right? And there's knobs everywhere, and I'll kind of go over briefly what they do, at least for what I do with them. Now, to adjust the headphone volume, it's a separate knob right here. That's for the headphones. Okay, now, so let's recap here real quick. We have my microphone when I'm podcasting coming on channel 1, okay? My guest host and my Skype channel is here on channel 4. And what I use channel 7/8 for are for sound effects from my my iMac that I record on. So let me just play you a couple sound effects. Okay, now those sound effects are coming from the same machine I record on, and I'm doing that by routing that audio through this channel. Okay. Now my Skype my host or my guest host can also hear this because I'm routing it through the mixer. Now it routes through the mixer and back into the 27-inch iMac, and it routes into the Skype channel. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a second. So down here, let me just go to the basics here. Down here you have your master. Well, this is your master main mix right here. This controls the overall output. And I as you can see here, I don't know if you can see the numbers, but I have it set to 0. 0 for the left channel, 0 for the right channel. And remember, we want to stay around 0 decibels so that we don't overclip and makes the audio crappy. Now over here, I have the main channel audio set to 0. Right here, set to 0. Again, we don't want to go too high. We want to have some headroom. Over here, on my Skype channel, I'm a little bit below 0. And the reason I do that is because when my co-hosts are coming into Skype, they're coming in pretty hot. So I can control their overall volume, and I like to bring them a little bit below 0. I usually go around -2, -4 decibels, and that way I can always, boost their audio in post when I'm editing. Over here, this channel here, number 2, I have it preset. This is the channel that I use for my lapel mic, but I'm not using it right now, as you can see. And over here on channel 1, I have it set to just under 0. I always like to have my voice a little bit more powerful than my co-host in case I need to if the show gets off the rails, I like to bring the show back on the rails by being able to overpower them easily without muting them. Now, just above all of those main channel volumes is a mute button on this particular mixer. Now, other mixers will vary from brand to brand, but usually there's a mute button right above that channel audio. So I can hit the mute button, and you will see this yellow light will come on when I'm muted, and you couldn't hear my audio. So as an example, here on the channel 2 that I use my lapel mic, it's muted. I always leave it muted just in case. I don't know why, in case for whatever reason. So it's muted, and there's a little light that says muted. Now, when I talk into that channel, you won't be able to hear me. So like if I have to cough during a podcast or sneeze, or if I need to take a drink of water because my mouth is getting dry, I can quickly hit the mute button, and then I can cough, do what I need to do, and nobody in the podcast has to hear it, and it doesn't interrupt anyone that's talking. Moving right up the channel here, we're going to go right through channel 1 first. We have panning. Now, if you're podcasting and you're not doing it with any kind of weird dramatic effect, you want to leave panning set to the middle, which is 0. So if you turn it to the left, you'll hear me coming to the left side of the speakers. I'll give you an example. So right now, you should only hear me coming out of the left side. And right now, you should hear me coming out of the right side. So we want to set that to 0, leave that on 0. Now, right here, I have an FX or an auxiliary out, an FX out. I do not use that, although I could if I wanted to, and that would give me the sound effects out of this sound effects processor. As a podcaster, I normally don't mess with that. Now, here we have auxiliary. Now, here is the important piece right here. Because when you're using a Skype machine, you're going to need to create a mix minus, and I'm going to explain that right now. As you can see here, the red knob, or the auxiliary volume. So imagine this. The volume comes in from my voice up here, so this XLR cable, runs down the channel, hits a preamp, and I'll explain that in a second, runs down through the EQ, and hits this auxiliary line, and gets split in this direction to my Skype channel. It's also coming back down through this audio, down through this volume, and then goes over to the master main mix out. That's the way I look at it. That's the way it helps me to understand it. So I just kind of follow the line. So now if we follow this line down, you'll see right here I have, this is called the gain, and this is basically pushing my voice out, giving it a little bit of juice. Right here is a built-in compressor, which works okay. I find myself using different types of compressors in post, software-wise, which is a whole nother episode. Down here I have my EQ. I like to turn down my highs and my mids, and I like to give myself just a little bit, a little hint of bass. so I don't sound nasally, and I have a little bit more of a broadcaster voice. Don't mess with these too much, just a little bit of a pinch here and there, because you could really throw off your voice and sound terrible if you're not careful. Now, down here to the auxiliary, like I said, I have the auxiliary set to about a quarter. It doesn't really give you any measurement here. So I set it to about a quarter, and it sends the volume over here, and it goes out to my Skype host, so my Skype people can hear me. If I turn this knob to 0 all the way down in this position, they won't be able to hear me. So when I'm doing like a pre-roll and I don't need the host to hear what I'm doing, I turn this down and my hosts cannot hear what I'm saying. And that's important because if you notice that on channel 1, like I said, I have it turned to a quarter, but on the Skype channel, on channel 4, I have it turned to 0. That's where the mix minus comes in. And we're going to get into that a little bit more in a second. And then the volume goes down. It passes the FX because I'm not doing any fancy, sounds. Pan is set to 0, and it goes through here, and then it goes out a USB cable back into my recording machine, which is my 27-inch iMac. I know this is getting complicated. I'm trying to not make it too complicated. Okay, so let's go back to Skype. So here's a Skype channel, and it's going to go down the same way, and I'm using an XLR. This is an XLR cable that's going to a 3.5 millimeter into, well, this is an input, so it's going to sound a little bit backwards. The headphone jack is feeding into here because whatever the laptop is hearing, I want the mixer to hear. So that's coming in here. Of course, you can hook it up with an XLR or a quarter-inch jack. Now, there's a reason why I do it this way. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but I have a particular reason why I do it this way because I want to use the compression, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. But so the audio comes in here, goes down to the preamp, which I don't have turned on very loud because the Toshiba pushes out a pretty good amount of volume. Comes down to the channel, gets compressed, runs down. Now, here is the auxiliary out, and the auxiliary out, which is a cable right here, back here is an auxiliary cable, that runs back into the Skype machine. But because this is set to 0, the people in the Skype machine do not hear themselves back. That's where the mix minus comes in. So the audio comes in and you're mixing it, pushing the audio all over, minus the Skype machine, minus the channel that came in initially. So they won't be able to hear themselves. If I want to really mess with my hosts, I can turn this up, and when they talk, they'll hear themselves back, and it makes for a real mess, just a real mess. But with this setup, it allows the audio to come in and to go into the recording machine. And I can, this is the auxiliary, I can pipe it anywhere I want to. Okay, so my volume comes in, and it gets split into 2. It goes out to my main recording machine, and it goes into the Skype channel. Skype audio comes in, and it just goes back into my recording machine, into my Apple iMac. Now over here, the iMac, the sound effects come in, it comes down, it gets split to Skype, to the main mix, and out of the USB, back into my recording machine. I know it's a little bit complicated, but it's not as bad as it seems. When you start messing with it and fiddling with it, it's not quite as bad as you think. Oh, don't let the knobs fool you. You're only going to be using so many knobs on here. I don't even use any of this stuff over here. I've messed with it before, but I don't really see a reason to use it, at least for podcasting wise. So I have an XLR cable coming in for my microphone, and that's an XLR to XLR. I have an XLR to a 3.5 millimeter jack. This is coming off of the headphone jack, off of my Skype machine or my laptop, coming in and mixing. I have a split Y cable with the 2 quarter-inch. This is coming off my iMac. It's a 3.5 coming off the iMac, coming from the headphones, because remember the headphones is the volume that would be pushing audio to this machine. And then I split it to make it stereo. Comes down this channel for sound effects, goes back around to the recording. Here's your headphone connector, and back here is your auxiliary out. The auxiliary out is very important on a mixer if you're going to be using it for podcasting, because without the auxiliary out, you can't do the mix minus for Skype, and it's never going to work right. You got to be able to do a mix minus if you're going to have one of these setups. Now, real quick, this mixer has been very good to me, although I have been looking at getting an external hardware compressor. Now, this has built-in compression, and that's why I do it this way. That's why I hooked it, because I could hook the Skype into this channel, but I wanted to use the compression for my hosts. So this is it's an okay compression. You adjust the knob, and what compression does is it keeps your audio balanced. So if somebody starts talking really loud, it will lower the actual volume level. The perceived volume won't change, but the actual volume level will go down. So you're not blowing out people's eardrums when somebody has a hefty laugh on one of your podcasts. So a compressor is very cool. You don't need to have a compressor. You can actually adjust the volume, like I was saying, without ever needing a compressor. But I use a compressor because controlling my host's volume, if I have 5 guests, that's very difficult because I can only control them off one channel. This mixer isn't set up to take in as much input as I could do. Those mixers actually get quite expensive. This mixer here was like $190 on Amazon. They make the sister model, which I believe is $150. My sister has that, which is the one I would recommend. The only difference is it doesn't have the FX. You don't really need that. And of course, they have some less expensive ones. The thing to remember is you need that auxiliary out so that you can do a mix minus. Another thing that I would recommend if you're going to get serious into podcasting down the road, and like I tell everyone that I've ever tried to help podcast, or anytime I've ever been interviewed, plan for success. If your podcast is successful, whether it's through money or through fans or whatever the case may be, you want to plan for success. You want to try to get gear that will grow with you, with your podcast, rather than grow against you. Now, this particular mixer has been a good friend and has been doing a great job. But when I wanted to do a hardware compressor, which is not necessary, but I wanted one, it makes it difficult because I have another input here, but I really needed an insert line. So this is a quarter inch jack. For some microphones aren't XLR, they're quarter inch, or I could plug in, whatever, quarter inch. But this is an input only on this mixer. Some mixers have another jack that looks just like it, but it's called an insert. And what that insert does is it allows audio to come in and out of that same jack so that you can use a compressor in line to your audio, and then you can adjust your volumes very, very easily. That's a whole nother episode that I would have to do on compressors. And I'm still kind of learning it right now, matter of fact. You can actually hear it on some of my shows. My latest shows, I've been using compression in software. I'm trying to think what else I can show you here on this mixer that would be important. When you're plugging things in and you're getting ready to test, do some test recordings. Fiddle with the knobs, check it out before you actually commit to putting the podcast out. And take your time with it. Really take your time and do a lot of research online. There's lots of guides. There's lots of great information out there. But one more recap, just so I make sure that I get this across properly. Yes, you can record a podcast, a simple podcast without a mixer. Should you? Absolutely. If you have something to say, get out there and say it. I love podcasting. It's one of my favorite things to do other than the videos. I mean, I've created a whole network trying to make this my living. That's how much I love podcasting. If you want something a little bit more elaborate, you're going to have guest hosts, you're going to have guests on. I would recommend getting a mixer. You don't have to necessarily get this mixer, but it would be good to have a mixer. So again, channel 1 is my microphone coming in. It splits twice. It splits going to the auxiliary, which goes to Skype so that my hosts can hear me, my co-hosts and my guests. And it also goes out to the main mix, out to the recording iMac that I use. Nothing on channel 2 or 3. Channel 4 is a Skype channel. It comes in. The auxiliary is 0 so that they don't hear themselves back through the auxiliary. It just goes straight down to the main mix out, back into the iMac. Over here is my iMac output for sound effects. It comes down and it splits to Skype, going to the auxiliary, and it keeps continuing down to the main mix, back out into the recording. Okay, thanks for watching my video, and I hope that I was able to answer some of your questions and to give you an idea whether or not you need a mixer for podcasting. You can always rate and review me. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, whatever you think. Just be honest about it. If you have any questions, tag them down below. And I try to get to the question. I try to answer the questions as quickly as possible. That being said, that's the end of the video. You can check out all the videos I do at tnerdT.tv, and of course, check out our website at tnerdT.com, which is the home hub for Total Nerd Takeover Studios. And check out our Facebook page, facebook.com/Total Nerd Takeover. Of course, I'll try to put some links in the description down below. And check out our podcasts. We have a Game of Thrones podcast called Behind the Iron Throne. We have a pop culture and technology, all nerd roundtable podcast we do called T-Nerd-T. We have my sister does a podcast called The Hockey Hour, which talks about all things hockey because, nerds like hockey or sports too. We also do a Nerd Theater, which is a movie review podcast. And of course, we have a video game podcast called T-Nerd-T Gaming. Basically, all you have to do is type in T-Nerd-T in any search for any podcasting. And I hope you guys like my videos because I'm going to keep doing them. And I'll see you guys next time for another video.